right, so we're here for the March 12th, 2025 meeting of, I don't remember what the actual title was, the Homelessness Regional Working Group for Boulder County. So thanks, everybody. Online, I'm just gonna have folks say their name and their titles, please, and then we'll go to the room.
Nicole Sampson, Lafayette City Council.
Thank you.
Heidi Grove, Boulder County Housing Department, Division of Homeless Systems and Coordinated Response.
Thank you. And we had MJ Adams with Town of Erie with us for the previous section, so we'll make sure we get that presentation.
Here, people from Netherlands was here.
I thought I saw somebody else on there. Okay, thank you. And the mayor from Netherlands was also on. Okay, and we'll go name and titles this side, Jen.
Okay, Jan Peterson, County Administrator. Lisa Ritchie, Town Superior.
Tanya Dante, trustee with the Town of Lyons.
Marta Loachamin, Boulder County Commissioner.
Arlington City Council, Lewis. Susie Hidalgo Berry, Mayor Pro Tem City Council for Longmont.
Thank you. And then
Kirk Fernhavel with the City of Boulder Health and Human Services.
Gwen Mossman, Boulder County Housing Department, Supportive Housing Division.
Heriberto Mendoza, City of Longmont Human Services.
Christina Pacheco, City of Longmont Human Services.
thank you, everybody. Appreciate that. So we had a presentation, two really good presentations. Thank you for that information, staff. We were like, what do we need to know before we get into this conversation in 2025? So I found that really helpful, and I hope others did too. And then of course the continual homework assignments. But so we'll get make sure that folks get a copy of the Regional Housing Partnership dashboard presentation and just maybe a couple notes on that about what the plan is and some of the questions that were asked. And then also, and that was MJ Adams that presented that. And then from Lisa Ritchie, thank you for putting together, compiling some information on what you and others have been working on in that working group for staff from some of the cities and towns here in Boulder County on the HB 24-1152 state legislation that is really giving us an opportunity to look at how we might use ADUs and backyard cottages to address this issue of homelessness around Boulder County. So that's what we just saw. So we are to the point here where we can have some conversation together and roundtable. There's a few different questions that were part of the agenda. So the first one was just to share any ADU documents that you have, if you've got any details around expected adoption date. There was a little bit of a summary in what Lisa shared, but if there's other pieces that you wanted to share, staff contact information, intended impacts of ADU policies, procedures on housing availability in your community. That's the first question. And then we're going to talk about barriers that you're discovering that might prevent ADUs in your city, town. And then also the question on regional work that could help to overcome the barriers. And so even to see the timeline that you shared, Lisa, in your presentation was really helpful to me. So is there someone that wants to start?
Document that you shared with me, Alberto, is that from
the current? That's not, yes.
Adopted in 2021?
I believe so.
Yeah.
We're
we may change it.
updating it.
Yeah.
It should come to council in the next few months.
Okay, because I know that, so we had a conversation looking at the new requirements, and council had decided to wait until the state kind of hashed out a lot of their, I think there was some back and forth around,
They were publishing guidance on some interpretation.
yes. So once that was finished, council as a whole decided we're gonna wait until that's completed, and then we'll move forward with adding these accommodations to our ADU. Something that I've heard from residents, I'm really happy about the HOA thing, because that's something I'm hearing from residents that they would like to be able to have these granny flats, these spaces for their aging parents, because they can't afford to sell their house and downsize. They would be paid more even to downsize. So that's been a huge barrier. So I think having that HOA component included in there will open the doors for several people in that situation. The other thing that I'm hearing are the fees. Some folks, so I have a resident who reached out to me and he's adding an attached ADU for his adult son with mental illness. And he's really struggling with that financial piece. So I'm going to talk to staff and see what can be done. But if we can look at things that help minimize, especially people who are trying to provide housing for aging family members with disability or mental illness, that would be something that would be very helpful and something to be advocating for in my opinion. Other things that I've heard, and I think that might be alleviated with the ADU change, are the setbacks. So we have some significant setbacks in our current policy, so minimizing some of those would be helpful. That's what I have for now.
That's great. Thank you.
Something might come later.
That's great. Councilmember Sampson, I saw you come on the screen, so I didn't know if you were ready.
Sure,
Just
I can say so. I mean, Lafayette, we redid our accessory dwelling unit code in 2023, and we really pushed, as far as we could towards before even House Bill 1152 came out. So now we have very minimal changes that we need to do to align with that House bill. One of the things, though, that I have heard from the community is the cost of the water tap fee. It's not something we have a whole lot of control over, but just for example, in Lafayette, I just looked up our water tap fee is around $40,000. And then there's another $2,000, some sort of infrastructure equity fee on top of that. And I was talking to an individual, she's in her 80s and she's paid off her house, but she feels like she needs to have some sort of income, and she's been looking at a variety of options, and one of them could be this. The problem is all she has at her discretion is $30,000. So she can't do a renovation to put an ADU on and pay the water tap fee. So we have a lot of people who have started through the process and get stuck at that point.
Can I ask you a question on that? It's a great example, and I think this is going to help us kind of think about with these different examples that folks are hearing. When this particular person is saying they can't do the renovation required to have a second income on the property that they already own, is there a financing gap? Is there a need for portfolio lending, as an example, and Colorado partners who would help with the financing versus just trying to understand
General,
cash, maybe through 30,000 available, maybe doesn't want to finance, but I'm just wondering if there's alternatives outside of refinancing your entire home.
right. Most of these people have looked in. I think the issue is the water tap fee, the cost of the water tap fee in combination with trying to renovate for an ADU. They're going to spend so much money. And they don't have, many of the people that are trying to do it don't have an income that allows them to get a loan. So maybe a low interest loan would help them, but they don't have enough finances coming in. This is sort of their secondary financing strategy, to go from, struggling paycheck to paycheck to feeling like they got a little breathing room. So they really don't have discretionary income in order to pay that water tap fee. They may be able to get enough to do a renovation or work with people in their family or friends and start doing that ADU creation. But they run into the water tap fee and you can't do anything about it. So yeah, maybe a low interest loan for them to cover some of the other costs is a possibility.
and I'm just thinking about that, and I know on that list of, there was a couple of points that I think it might be helpful, if that's okay, that one of them was provide financial support for low-income residents, which I heard Susie kind of talking to, excuse me, council member. And so I think that might fall into some of those. And like, I'm not arguing that 40,000 is exorbitant for a water tap, but I'm also thinking of like, what are the solutions that we could regionally talk about? Because a regional or water tap is gonna be different city to town. So,
I hear you.
thank you.
I can speak to the water tap if you like, because Lions decided early on to waive the water tap fee. But we were very lucky in that Longmont was on board with us waiving that fee because of the CBT share being too large for a tap for a single family home. And so you can imagine for an ADU, which is like, and we limited ours to 800 square feet. So limiting it from, a 3,000 square foot home where the tap was already too large for CBT share, limiting that to an 800 square foot ADU, Longmont was going to waive that if it's on the same property. Because already that CBT water tap is already too large for that single family home. So if you add an EDU, it doesn't make a big difference. So you could talk to your utility provider who's providing the water, and everybody's situation is going to be different. But Longmont was on board with us waiving that fee.
We thought about a tiered structure. So if you allow an ADU larger than 800 square feet, they have a tap fee of
Right.
then.
And we're going to ask our UV to look at that.
Yeah.
If we increase this, so right now we're having that discussion on Monday about are we willing to increase the size of the ADU from 800 square feet to 1,000 or 1,200, but we need the UEB's, recommendation on that tiered. And the other thing we're really concerned about by raising or increasing the size of the ADU is how affordable will it be? If you keep it small, the thinking in the beginning in 2016 was that it would keep rent small. And the larger you build, the more you're going to have to charge. So then you're losing the affordable aspect. So really, I can tell that just from the discussion we just had, we're very reluctant to increase the size from 800 square feet. You can have a 2-bedroom, 2-bath, as Studio Shed. If you haven't visited Studio Shed yet, is it Louisville? It's from Louisville. Right, Louisville. If you haven't visited Studio Shed, you should really go see what it looks like to see a 2-bedroom, 2-bath unit at 900 square feet, just to see for yourself, like how much of a footprint it takes up. I was really impressed with that. And it's local.
Susanna and I, or Susanna's not on tonight. I was looking up at the screen. Susanna's in DC, but we went down and toured it.
Yeah, it's worth a tour. And the owner is very happy to answer all of your questions. So feel free to book an appointment. Let him know it's Mike Koenig, right? Yeah, I can even get you his email address, but yeah, feel free to reach out to him and take a tour.
I'm curious what everyone's reaction is to this. So you mentioned if you increase the size of the ADU to a certain extent, then it's no longer in that naturally affordable category, right? What if for the individual building the ADU, they actually have intention to move into that and then take the income from their front house so that they can remain on their property in their town? Like,
We recently had that situation. We actually had residents come up during the audience business and say, listen, we need to build this ADU for us to live in. And so it needs to be this size. I think it needed to be 1,200 square feet maybe while they were remodeling the main home. And so is that an exemption? Maybe is there a waiver? Is there a case by case? I mean, we've only heard of that once so far.
yeah,
But
and
that's
the other reason why I ask is because I don't know the details in everyone else's communities, but in some instances, the primary structure is a very tiny miner's cabin,
Agreed.
right?
Agreed.
That maybe a family has outgrown, and these are all just like made up circumstances. It was landmarked, and so they can't change it. So they're like, let's build the ADU and live there. And then, so I'm just trying to think
Sure.
of all the different scenarios where actually the ADU could turn into the structure where the owner of the property lives, and then they rent out the property. I mean, just, I guess, food for thought as we continue this conversation. There might be other models of how people use that rather than I think what we all typically think of as rent out the ADU and live in the primary structure, right?
The other thing that I just texted Susie is through HICPUF. There's a community mental health supports waiver that I think the maximum lifetime that you can get is $14,000. But my question is, could that be leveraged with other sorts of waivers through our towns and cities, and would that help in this specific situation? It could benefit this person that Susie's talking about.
Yeah.
$14,000 isn't a small.
Do you know where I see that $14,000 going? Because this is our challenge right now, is that when we adopted the 2021 International Building Fire Codes, they literally require a sprinkler system in any new build, including ADUs. And we had an ADU builder come to us and ask us, could you please waive it for ADUs? And we had the fire chief looking at us going, you have no idea how long or how quickly a fire consumes a house nowadays. When it used to take 15 minutes, 10 years ago, now it takes 5 minutes. So he said, actually having that sprinkler system slows the fire down and gives us time to get there and save somebody's life. So we were very reluctant to waive the requirement of a sprinkler system, and a sprinkler system is literally between $10,000 and $15,000. And I feel like this is our biggest challenge right now, is that because we don't have to worry about the water tap fee, we have to worry about the sprinkler system. And I can see here Trustee Brown, who has he's a lot more of an expert on ADUs than I am. He sent me his comments, and he was wondering if somebody like Studio Shed or another similar modular home builder could actually put IBE compliant sprinklers in small modular homes. And if so, how much would that cost? So maybe there's a partnership there with small local enterprises who are working with different entities and providing these affordable options, these affordable ADUs. Is there a way? Because it's just like a Lego kit. And he said you can have everything and the kitchen sink sent to your address, and then you just build it like a Lego set. But is there a way that they can include a sprinkler system? If they're buying, a mass number of them, then maybe the cost could come down. That's our biggest challenge, for sure.
That's your question from the
Yeah, so you had asked, what is a non-conforming ADU,
Oh, yes,
or
yeah.
what is the strategy around that? So what we would consider that as an ADU that existed kind of before the code was adopted, right? So we all probably can think of people who have converted their basement into an apartment and are renting it out, but they never actually received like a certificate of occupancy, and it's officially an ADU. And so as we're implementing these new codes, we need to think about strategies that make it easy for those folks to actually come in and get a permit.
Okay.
And there might be some, relief on some of the codes if it were new, but it's in the long run, probably something to think about in terms of a compromise to get them to have the basic life safety components for those existing structures that already exist today that you want to get into conformance. One thing to think about, and you can suggest to your staff, the 2024 international codes have an ADU appendix in the building code. So there's a new ADU building code appendix, which we're looking at, which I think have options for internal and attached, not detached, where sprinklers are required, if your code requires sprinklers. But different options on how to meet like fire separation and things like if you wire the smoke alarms together, then you don't necessarily have to meet all the fire separation requirements, intending, I think, to make the conversion of some of the interior spaces the balance of, again, safe, but financially and technically feasible. So it's not really available to communities till they get on those 2024 codes, but that's something that we will be integrating into our code when we adopt the 24 codes.
Marta, can I give some input from Boulder?
Yeah.
Since Lauren's not here. I'm not going to go through this, but I'll mention a couple of things that might be helpful. So prior to the city of Boulder implementing the ADU ordinance, we've done this a couple of times. We've sent out surveys to people who have ADUs and had them for a while. We've also sent questionnaires out to neighbors of ADUs. And some of the interesting things that we found is that pretty much all ADUs are rented at affordable rates. And whether they're 500 square feet or 1,000 square feet. And the other trend that we saw is that most people didn't know that they were a neighbor to an ADU. And so in this last stage, basically everything was taken out as far as use and ownership and anything that would restrict how the ADU is used and who it's rented to. I think for a couple of reasons. One is it's incredibly hard to, from a staff standpoint, to regulate that. And we used to have, we had affordable ADUs where someone would sign a letter of commitment to renting them at an affordable, we got rid of that. And it's easier on someone applying for getting an ADU permit. And it's also easier on to have to regulate it in the future. So, and I've seen the city of Boulder go through a transition that seems like almost all communities do. They start off with restrictions, and a few years later they lessen, and they're all done. So I think the lesson from that is to start from step 3. You're saying like 20 years.
Painful council meetings.
You do it once instead of like 3 times.
Oh, that's really helpful.
That's exactly what we discussed at our last workshop on EDUs, like February 18th. And it was literally like simplify, simplify, simplify.
Yeah.
How do we streamline this? How do we simplify this so that we can have more? Because we estimate that maybe we have 15 permitted EDUs, but we probably have double that are unofficial. If not more. I mean, and we don't have any way of tracking it. You know, the town administrator can walk around all day, looking up, I think that one might be an ADU. I know, I mean, they did that to try and come up with our number of affordable housing units, and it's not easy to track, that's for sure. So I agree with you, simplify. Like, I want to go back and revisit I want to see the 2024. I feel like we need to jump ahead to 2024 and see these ADU requirements, because I know that when we passed the building codes and we didn't accept the waiver for sprinkler systems, I could feel it. I think I am on public record literally saying, I worry about us shooting ourselves in the foot. Like I could feel, I was like, a life doesn't have a price, that you can't put a value on a life. Of course, we were there to protect lives, but I was like, and how are people going to afford to build an ADU if they have to spend $10,000 or $15,000 on a sprinkler system? So I like this idea of a low interest loan, or asking these builders to, build in these sprinkler systems, or looking into these ADU requirements in the new building.
I think you might find if sprinklers become really a challenge, you'll see more attached. People will attach it to the existing house rather than detaching it, because they'll be having to avoid, depending on the code you have. Right, but you might see more people connecting them if that's really a barrier.
Well, what we're really excited about in Lions, me personally, is I can't wait to communicate the heck out of this new bill in advance of June 30th. It is. I've had at least 2 people in a subdivision reach out to me and say, I've started renovating the downstairs. They want to convert their basement into an ADU, and they're like, but is it possible yet? Is that because they have, an HOA, and the HOA president, of course, sits on the board of trustees next to me, and he's there reminding me, like, oh, no, I've sat down and talked to him first, and I'm like, June 30th, June 30th, June 30th. Those days are out the window. And I see people like they're waiting. They started the work, but that's not conforming because it's not permitted yet, right? But I could see they need the extra revenue. They need a solution for their aging parent or their, whatever theirs. And all I see is like more affordable housing. So I'm getting really excited about this state law, and I just can't wait to just blast everybody with this option and somehow get around the sprinkler system. That's going to cost them, because if it's a basement conversion, then you need that fire suppression ceiling, don't you?
Well, again, that's, I think, some of the 24 codes, like, again, if you connect the smoke alarm system, like, so that they go off on both sides,
Okay.
then you don't maybe have to do the full fire separation.
Okay.
I'm not a building code expert.
No, but I
Read
love
the
that
code.
idea.
Stop
Read
your
the
phone.
code. At this point, I can't wait to read the code tonight. It's my bedtime reading.
So I wanna ask,
I was just gonna offer, I think all of us who are staff in the room are thinking about programs that we know of that homeowners could tap into, specifically aging population. AAA has home modification grants available. In the IDD community, there are grants available. So I think if y'all as elected officials would appreciate between maybe now and the next meeting, staff could put together maybe a resource list of what that could look like. I'm recalling how we did that after Marshall Fire to help folks who were rebuilding from Marshall Fire to understand all the resources that they could access. And I think that would not be a hard task for staff.
Sounds like a great article to me.
Well,
That's my 2 article. It's ADUs for sure. Check.
so if y'all would appreciate that.
Yes.
then-
Yes, please.
I would actually offer, I mean, I'm gonna throw this out here. Because to me, I think it's actually very interesting. And I want to tie all of this back to like what we are here about. Because it feels like this could go in so many different directions and housing is connected to the results of homelessness and, right? And what would it look like if this group really did pull together? And I apologize in advance to the staff in the room. Well, what would that look like if this group really did pull together an informative session to the public, like a public meeting?
Q&A.
That could be like a little bit of an update of like, this is the ask that people, not just elected officials, but community members. This is where we're going, like kind of an update on what we're doing. But have those invite those folks to do the presentation. That really is like, we are trying to find solutions right now for folks to be able to use this state legislation. Because to me, it's an implementation of folks making decisions over here.
Yes.
And how do we remove the barriers, so some of the things that we were talking about earlier. Who could we bring in the room to really encourage them to come up with some of these economic solutions, incentives, et cetera. So that could almost be maybe our next gathering, or we could do something in between.
I love that idea, and I love the idea of it becoming like a bit of a fair where you can invite partners such as Studio Shed to come and even present what they have on offer. There are some very affordable solutions starting at like $160 a square foot. And people need to know that.
Right, I mean, it's the opportunity to inform
Right.
people, again, connected to, and I think there's a way to bring in that message of like, we know we have an issue for folks who are needing housing, period, and here's another option for all the different reasons. What do people?
I love
Should
it.
I put that on a post-it for the end of?
Post it, I've got one right here.
Okay, next potential steps.
AD workshop / fair.
You added fair.
All right,
I'm not saying no, but I just want everyone to think about it, though.
I'll put please.
But the question about grants, right?
Yes.
Okay, did everyone get to go through that first part?
Marta, I don't think you were able to share from the county's perspective if you are interested.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I mean, I think for us, because we have the option with that legislation of becoming a supportive jurisdiction, right? So all of this is gonna help inform my guests looking at the calendar. And we don't have our full team back together until April. We probably aren't gonna make a June 2025, but what we are and already have in the work plan with our planners is, as Jana kind of alluded to, that next potential use of ADUs to add on to another option for the county. So that's really what I'm pulling everything from to kind of try and guide that conversation as the lead on homelessness for unincorporated Boulder County. So that's what thinking about right now. So I'm gonna be very interested in what you all are thinking on square footage or any kind of like, what is everybody, are we coalescing? I think that's the beauty about the original conversations, right? If we could agree on whatever a relative number, that will make it easier for me to present something that maybe isn't 1,200 square foot or like, we get the asks because we have 35-acre parcels. We get the asks for 2,500 square foot ADU.
A 2,400 square foot ADU.
Yeah,
This looks like a house.
it's bigger than my home. With all due respect is how I've.
That's a
addressed that.
single family home.
It's more than a single family home, with all due respect.
Oh, my goodness.
As I talk about it, the dice. So, yeah, so this, like, this conversation will be very helpful to kind of, what are you all thinking on? How are you basing your ideas? I like the idea about tiers. I'd be interested if like, have people try to do that in other places and then ended up just going away, you know, like. So that was an interesting, like, the things that we're talking about, who's tried it, is it? Did
Well, and how many, if you have a 35-acre lot, how many you're gonna allow on that? Land?
I don't think there's a multiple question, but this ordinance would show, I mean, this law would show that you could have multiple.
That's a strategy.
Yeah. So, but that's just a quick update from county side. Thank you for that.
I'm happy to provide an update from as well.
Perfect, thank you.
Well, so we currently do not have any sort of ADU regulations within our community. So we're starting from scratch. I appreciate like diligently taking notes here. Next week will be our first reading. Second reading is expected in early April. So that's where we currently stand. What I can share is just some chatter within the community thus far, since we don't have experience on this topic at this point in time. Some of the chatter I've heard again is around water tap fees and how those are prohibitively expensive for many individuals. There's been some asks for creativity given how unique some of our lot shapes and sizes are, especially within Old Town. Some creativity around lot coverage, setbacks. There's also been some conversation around incentivizing accessible ADUs as well. So again, if I kind of pull this all together, it's minimizing upfront costs as much as possible with incentives. That's where we are.
And just to thank you for that, just to be clear on the incentivize, when you say incentivize accessible, I'm hearing ADA.
Yeah, that's what that individual in the community, I mean, I think you could take that specific example and extrapolate out to other types, right, of accessible, yeah.
Okay.
But I think the point is that if somebody's willing to build a unit that could help target a specific population that's in need of these units, maybe consider incentivizing that, whether it's monetarily or giving them more lot coverage or something of that nature.
Thank you. And I just want to make sure that's part of it. Okay.
I can tell you what the Town of Lyons board decided for this budget, the 2025 budget. We actually approved a $1,000 annual property tax rebate for ADUs rented to 80% or less AMI tenants. It's an experiment that's capped at 5 properties to limit potential effect on the town budget. So we're only really putting in $5,000 for 2025. But what would be super helpful, this is what Trustee Browning is saying here. He had hoped that the town would ask the county to join this experimental program by also providing a county property tax rebate. Make it.
Sounds like.
He's thinking sprinkler system. I know he is.
Right.
He's like, how do we
Sounds like innovation fund almost? Part of the AHT tax as the innovation fund for some sort.
Innovation fund from the AHT. I like that idea.
And you said 1,000 rebate to, and then
So we would have to somehow, there would have to be, like you said, a signed, agreement, saying that they're renting to, tenants who, make 80% or less in a month, 80% or less. Innovation fund, did you say?
Yeah. And then just to, respond to Kurt's comment, how is staff enforcing that?
That's a really great question. That's a really great question. we haven't had an example come up yet. I mean, obviously this, town planner probably, or town administrator coming up with the program. I mean, again, we're talking about five.
Yeah,
Five.
it was just kind of a curiosity of like.
Yeah, we haven't crossed that threshold. I think people are still trying to figure out how to like, hey, how are they gonna pay for this big project? It's a big project. There's no doubt about it.
Then as far as the numbers of units expected in the community, I don't anticipate that we expect a large number up front, but, we do have a significant portion of our community that rebuilt from the Marshall Fire. Some of them who are still in the rebuilding process. Some of them who might have built their garages with the intention, right, to then convert it in the future to an ADU. So there's an unknown variable there for us.
Let's go to the second question, which was, what barriers are you discovering that prevent ADUs from happening? I think we've heard a few of them, but is there anything that hasn't been, that someone didn't share specific to?
The only barrier that I have on my list for the city of Boulder was not having expedited permitting processes. By definition, these take a long time in the city of Boulder. So that's something that we haven't. Some people are asking.
Well, and thank you for that, because I was curious, and maybe it's just the way I heard the presentation. I was thinking that the legislation addressed the processes.
It requires administrative process. It doesn't set, like Prop 123 sets a shot clock for review times. The law doesn't have a set review time. It just says you can't trigger a public hearing. So that, right.
I mean, that's a plus already, right?
So it's absolutely a plus, but yeah, it doesn't say you have to review ADUs faster than any other building permit on the face of the law.
And our process could be long without a public process.
Well, I don't disagree. Guilty.
Is that a follow-up question to your comment? You can't trigger a public hearing even for historic properties.
That's an exception.
That was on the. Okay.
Sorry. Any historic district regulations, there are carve-outs for historic district review, so clarify that. Since Jen Howish is in here, I can talk about Superior's experience a little bit. So I think one thing in Superior, which we're really pleased to see, we revised our ordinance after Marshall Fire to allow ADUs to be built in advance of the primary home in the zone districts where they were allowed. And last we checked, I think at least 30% or more of the properties that were rebuilding where ADUs were allowed built that ADU. And so I think that was, and we have properties out there still today that only have an ADU and do not have our primary structure yet. So I think from our perspective, does it actually matter which one comes first? Something to ask yourselves, is this something that we should regulate? I think that's been helpful for our rebuilding community.
That's helpful, thank you. Are there barriers? Try not to get caught up in the costs, but I know we've talked about some of this.
The setbacks.
Okay.
Next question of Lisa. I think at one point we were looking at having like a matrix of the different communities and like sizes and restrictions and.
I did not have a chance to pull that together. I wanted to get, and I think, honestly, I think some of it until all of the codes are in place.
Yeah, will be.
I think we'll do that. I ran out of time today. That was what I had intended to do for tonight, but we'll get it put together.
That was intended, but thank you.
It's okay, I know.
That was not like the confession in front of everyone. It felt like we are fine. We understand. We all have grace. But it's good to know that that's still something kind of on the.
Yeah, and I think too, like what you all are talking about is, something as staff, and I can tell you staff in all these communities are thinking about, how do we communicate these new regulations? Do we need to do workshops for maybe non-conforming ADUs? Hey, I think I have an ADU in my basement, what do I need to do to get it into compliance? So toolkits, communication strategies, workshop within our own communities. to the degree it makes sense to do that regionally, I think we can, if you all think that would be helpful. So I know it's something that we're all kind of thinking about is messaging these new regulations.
Well, and I think an important message to share with these non-conforming uses is if you do not have a permit for your attached or detached ADU, your insurance won't be valid. And I don't know that many people realize that. And I feel like that is really important message, especially in this wildfire, urban interface where we're already having a hard time finding insurance. And we are at risk, so I feel like that's a huge educational piece as well. It's just reminding them, like, if you don't pull a permit, your insurance is.
Yeah, there's a lot of reasons to work with folks.
That's great. I don't know if I'm trying to figure out if it's a barrier, but what I'm trying to, just looking at the kind of timeline of where people are at, hearing some of the conversation, I am really interested in how we can roll out this type of a process differently to get another outcome. And what I mean by that is, where is the racial equity assessment tool, or whatever the different tools that people use in the jurisdictions. And I'd be curious to know if folks are doing that before they're drafting or as they're drafting, and certainly before anything gets finalized. And that the outcome that I'm looking for is, I think, where everybody's been talking about, like, how do we address the barriers? There's folks in all these different spectrums that I believe that are trying to figure out how to stay living in Boulder County. And we also have this issue of folks who are experiencing homelessness. And if majority of Americans are $400 away from going into a major financial crisis, it's only 27% of Americans. That's a big number. That is like, what's the connection here, and how do we address the barriers? How do we make sure? I'm worried about multilingual folks who are not connected to any of our government agencies, who without our help will never know that the law even changed. And so to create sustainable homeownership looks like an ADU so that you can pay your raising price tax in your grocery bills. So like, that's something that I'm just very interested in. I wonder if there's regional support in that area. And so what could we do? And I don't want to wait until we get to the fair to be like, oh, shit, we should have brought Pashto speakers so that we could do, like, what can we all do ahead of time in our policy making and our education and our workshops and our toolkits?
That's something if I'm following you correctly. That may be where the county level support on education could come in, like each individual municipality has their strategy for education and outreach. But is it the opportunity for Boulder County to have a more broad outreach that then directs people towards their individual municipalities so they at least know that these changes are happening?
I think that's for us to decide, like, how we, right?
And if I may suggest, the structure for that is the regional housing partnership, which has a communications function attached to it. So I think there's a mechanism for doing that, and that's something y'all want to.
I think the only thing I would suggest is that you want to make sure that everybody has gone through whatever, if Longmont's still working on theirs, you probably want to wait until everybody's adopted their final version before creating a campaign. I think that would make most sense.
And I appreciate that. And I'm also thinking about like the opportunity to do a process differently, to me looks like, how do we encompass racial equity outcomes in the very beginning? And not once we're ready to launch the campaign. Because I think we could truly bring in a whole lot of, like, there's partners that we could be bringing in right now to make sure that we do this well for the towns and cities that are each individually a little bit different as well.
I think, we have a really robust for transportation, as we're in City of Longmont is moving towards the Vision Zero. So we have our mobility meetups with constituents or with residents throughout the city. So I envision something, maybe that's something we can, in our own municipalities, with Boulder County support, of course. But to have those informative sessions in different sections of the community or throughout the county that would allow residents and access. So I think about access to language, having that educational piece of understanding what the law is. If people's end goal is to just have housing, what does that look like? If the end goal is to work towards purchasing a home, what are some steps that people need to take in order to get there? We have, and I know we have an on our website for first-time homeowners. Ownership, we have some different resources for folks to tap into. So, presenting that kind of information, kind of walking people through.
Phil did a good job of connecting with our advisory boards. And so I think if there is kind of a roadshow with advisory boards, there's a pretty broad reach. If you look at Housing and Human Services Advisory Board, Senior Center, Youth Council.
Yes.
I think there's the opportunity to utilize that.
I would love to add that to our post-it over there about resources for first-time homeownership, because that is a huge struggle.
I am a huge homeownership person. And I'm just gonna bring us back to the title of this group, right? Just gonna encourage us, because again, like, we could go all.
It's huge, it's huge.
And so I'm just trying to keep even myself.
I'm gonna look at the Longmont website.
I'm
just gonna,
I
can we
think
just
that's a
steal your
different
information?
group.
Yeah.
And I just,
And I'm
like,
happy to join
looking
you.
at that prevention, I feel like this brings us to homelessness prevention. And so, so maybe even targeting, so we're really consider, intentional on who we're targeting to receive this information, people who are on that cusp.
Well, can I speak to a specific example here just to illustrate what you're talking about? I don't think I can do it without crying. Okay. We have a resident in a community that's not very diverse. We have an African-American resident who's a veteran, who's handicapped, was able to secure housing at 50% AMI, who's facing addiction because of non-payment. And he was on the wait list for Boulder County Housing, the Wall Self-Sector in Lyons. There are 12 one-bedroom units, and there's a waiting list of 8 years, and he was on the waiting list. I don't know how many years. And he changed his email address. And he never got the email. And so he was kicked off the waiting list, and he had to start all over again. And this is one person I can think of who is literally going to be homeless. I have run a GoFundMe for him. I have personally given him cash this weekend so he can buy food. And I don't know. I don't know what to do for him. I don't know what to do. We have very limited resources when it comes to 30% for AMI or a portion of your revenue. He only has Social Security. I don't know why he doesn't have anything from the VA's office. And he has to start all over because of this change in email. And so this communication piece of this, I don't know how we can troubleshoot that so that these people struggle. Because the courts could decide, thank goodness for the Defense League, but the courts could decide that, he's allowed to be evicted. And I don't know where he's going to go. And I think of all of the homeless people on the streets holding up a sign telling us that they are veterans. I don't understand why veterans are taken care of. They're masked, and I know he's working with a social worker at the Hour Center. And I don't know what else to do. I just see the system failing him, and we're not helping him. and I don't know how to help. I just wanted to share that example because I feel like that is a concrete example that just illustrates where I'm grasping skills. He's trying to work every single agency he can, whether it's the area on the agency on aging, because he's at least 65 plus, or if it's the veterans office or whatever, you know, the hour center, like what he's trying to work all of the partnerships. And honestly, he just needs a unit at the Walt Self Center. And if his email hadn't changed, you know, whenever that changed and he hadn't missed that email from the Boulder County Housing Authority, then maybe he'd already be living at the Walt Self Center and we wouldn't be having this discussion. But I feel like there are cracks like that where people just like fall through the cracks. I don't know how to seal those. I don't know.
Trustee, I'm gonna encourage you to reach out to Heidi Grove because we actually do have specific programs for veterans. I don't know, and so I'll make sure the two of you have each other's contact.
And I think that, I mean, again, going back to like, yes, and both of what you were both saying is that we're here because we're being asked to come up with some solutions. It's not the solution because there isn't that solution. We're trying to come up with a way that we can use current legislation here in the state for our county, for our residents to address the ability for people to be housed. So I appreciate that. And I think we're in a good place of coming up with some a focus area and figuring out how we can do it. I'm hearing a lot of regional support. I'm also looking at the clock. We have 10 minutes. I think the question about regional work and where our post-its are, I think could actually come together and just decide what we want to do for the next step, build our anything that people want to have for agenda. So I think what I heard was, do we want to could have a next meeting that's like this and we can have some presentations come in to talk about what the different, we can fill in what that looks like for programs or groups that are building, we doing ADUs. What would you all like to see next?
I would love to expand this to the larger community, especially before June 30th. I've already made a note for our town to do that. And I just feel like if we could do that at a regional level as well, I just feel like we do need to communicate. I mean, it's just a really great way to, I mean, because there's a press release around a workshop, there's like communication with the communities. If there's a workshop, you're reaching out to the community. And I just feel like if people have, you know, questions, then this kind of workshop, they can come and there could be a Q&A.
Yeah, I think it could be done. What are you all? And I was just looking for the dates. So like
That's June.
June
That's the
11th.
next
11 Wednesday.
So June 11th is the next scheduled meeting. Maybe we should start with everybody make that date.
That's the end of June.
End of June, okay.
And I feel like the education piece is so important, but I'm concerned that if we were to take that on as work, then we're not careful, it could be redundant with what communities are already doing. Right? And like, is there some other way? We've talked about all these financial things, rebates and incentives, and is that a muscle we can flex more that the individual communities can't, and so it'd be worth our time to focus on that? I could be way off, of course, correct me if I am, but I'm just trying to think like what's unique about this group and the people in the room that the communities don't have.
And I see your hand, Heidi. I'll be right there. What I'm wondering, like, if we did some kind of event, fair, education, information, if we focused around an update on what this group is doing, what the legislation is, and I mean, like, some of that I think is really going to be new news if we do a great job of bringing general people into the room. An activity there could be like we see it most of all of the activities that we all do would be like what are like So what do we know? What do we need to know about what the financial burdens are? Would people be asking for an incentive? Would people be asking for upfront cash? Would people be looking for? Because I think there's probably all different places. We could even ask like, how much rent do you need to stabilize your household to avoid homelessness?
I think I could get behind that, not only like giving out data, but
Survey.
Survey.
That would help us maybe too.
So there could be like a survey form or something.
Like the boards that, I don't know, like the comprehensive plan is doing some of those, like where's your priority order, like if we. Like something. Heidi?
I actually put this in the chat. This is really for Lisa. Maybe we can take some of this conversation to our comms meeting tomorrow. Because we do have a smaller working group or subcommittee, if you will, of the Regional Housing Partnership Steering Planning Committee meeting.
Yeah.
That is really working on like the education and targeted audiences, and we were actually looking at potentially doing a anonymous survey of barriers and concerns, and so we can if you would like, we can continue to do that work in parallel, and hopefully we would have an update in June by then.
I agree, Heidi. I think it's a good conversation for the group if y'all like us to continue talking about it.
Thank you for that. And I mean, that's my other thought is like, just to be clear, we would need regional housing partnerships support.
Yeah.
To be able to do some type of an event. Councilmember Sampson, I just want to give you an opportunity to weigh in on that event.
I would love to hear more about writing something to allow HUD vouchers. As somebody who has watched people try to use HUD vouchers through a variety of means, that is one of the things that I think would be very helpful. It'd be also interesting if we could combine, I'd like to hear more about the program about the rebate, the sales tax rebate. And then could the county do that? I have some connections at the state that I'm certain I could kind of talk in their ears and find out, is there a possibility to do a tax rebate? Because in this environment, it feels like the state has been moving more to tax rebates versus grants. And it'd be interesting if we could tie those kind of things together. Would that incentivize people enough to pull, to build that ADU or take the ADU and rent it out to people who are at that preferably 60% AMI or below?
Thank you. And I saw a note from Heidi about being able to provide some of that if it's something the group would be interested in for June.
Yeah, I'd love
I
it.
also, that makes me wonder too, there are folks that are ITIN users that are able to purchase homes in the state of Colorado or in the country. That tax rebates, tax incentives requires a level of savviness as well. That I'm just trying to think of like, what's the counter to somebody who's not doing all their, like their electrification and all those things for the same reasons that others are, because a lot of people are talking about that like for tax benefits and but there's other people who own who could also use this type of structure like an ADU to stay in homes that might not have the same access to whatever the finances, the rebates, state funding. So just want to name that in the conversation because I think it would be helpful to hear what are some of those other ideas, like exactly where you're going and what about folks that otherwise can't access those pieces.
Yep.
So I want to hear, are you on June 11th for an event, an activity?
No, I'll be here. The only thing I had in June was.
I'm sorry, where are you right now in a commitment to?
Oh, a commitment.
A meeting
Like,
versus
thought we
an
were checking
event?
our schedules.
Yeah, like your opinion.
I would like to have a follow-up meeting Are you talking about in lieu of us meeting? I think that's where I was confused. Would this community meeting be in place of us meeting as a working group?
We could do it. That's still on the table.
Okay.
We could do both and we could do instead of.
So I just, one thing, I think June timeframe for some of our communities to organize a workshop when our codes are still actively under development and then thinking about Longmont. It could be pretty challenging to potentially get accurate information put together on a code that is
true.
really recent. So just something to consider as you're thinking about timing. I know it's urgent, but check with your staff.
I think that's good. And I don't think there's anything wrong with, because the other thing with June is that for a lot of folks, that's like vacation time and all those pieces. But we could almost do our June meeting as normal, as in a room and not in a fair. But I'm wondering about, we could open that up to a public for at least a portion of that as a presentation and do it like kind of a first step of educating even our own elected partners about the legislation and what that really means, just for folks that it's kind of fallen off the radar. And make sure that people know that we are very committed to the implementation to address the issue of homelessness. Like, maybe we could do it that way too, or we could just meet, get some more information, maybe start some planning with Regional Housing Partnership about.
I mean, I feel like I would like to do some more planning. I have some reservations, and I think just because where the city is with implementing changes to our ADU ordinance right now, June might look very different. But also, I was going to ask, would it open up the doors, since it is summertime, open up the doors for more participation if we went all virtual? If we did our next meeting virtually, would more people be able to participate than trying to do a hybrid or in person?
For more kind of, again, informational session with others.
If we had informational session with others, as well as just even those of us on this working group.
I was just telling Annie back though that we could get a meeting together.
Okay, yeah, I would like a meeting.
Down for Ted.
Yes,
Three of us.
yeah, because I want to have time to do that. I think that'll give me some more answers as far as what I want to see for the next meeting. But yeah, I'm just kind of throwing that. I mean, are people planning on, I can be here on June.
Yeah. Okay. The next meeting we have after that is September 17th. So I just want to kind of gauge, and we don't have to make an absolute decision because we have like 30 seconds.
Commissioner, can I just point out your availability on that day, which I forgot to mention to you today?
Yeah.
So the 10 county budget.
Oh, okay.
So if there's a willingness or to, and maybe it's far enough out that we can move that date to the week before would be September 10th. That has to work for people.
Okay.
Yeah, that's that. Yeah. Oh, I'll have to do that, or you can do the fair without me. It's fine. but I'd love to be there. Would folks feel like just right now gauging everything and not knowing anything about the world? 17th, would that be an air, like, could that be a potential, or the 10th? Could that be a potential fair or event?
Yeah,
It does make more sense with legislation.
yeah.
I had thought about where people were at, like
Yeah, nationwide.
I realized
I
we
would
started.
feel better.
Okay.
I would feel better than that.
Okay.
Or
Okay.
the 17th, September.
In September.
But I like, but as a compromise, I like it, the idea of inviting our elected officials to our next meeting in June so that they can
Like just
hear
an
what we're
update.
doing, an update.
Yeah,
Here's what
yeah.
we're working on, and here's what we have planned for September.
Yeah.
Could you please communicate that to your community? I mean,
That is great.
because honestly, I can feel the sigh of relief from our very teeny tiny town staff saying, the county is going to do a presentation, or the county is going to do some kind of workshop. Thank goodness, you know, and maybe actually that will inspire communities to go ahead and plan a workshop after.
Yeah, we can kind of build up, well, I said we, that wasn't generous. It could build something like kind of put together a template, and then other towns and cities could just play relative speaking. Okay, thank you all. It's 7:32. Appreciate everybody. We have in the works agenda for the next meeting, the documents will go out. And then we will work in the next 2 weeks before April 1st. We'll confirm what we're doing, planning on that September date. And we can look at venues and things like that. Awesome.
And just so you know, Jenna's going to forward, the email I sent with all of the documentation compliance.
Oh,
Photos and ordinances and like information and issues and all these things, the amendments, it's all.
If you want to send me your columns, I'll add those.
Thank you.
Thanks, all. Trustee, I will reach out to you about veteran stuff tomorrow.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
You're welcome. Thanks, all. Have